A very special guest today.
Yes.
Veli.
Close friend, special guest, Veli. How are you, sir?
I'm very good.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's seen you in this format in at least a decade, right?
Yeah, I've kept out of all media for about 10 years, since 2016.
It's like a coming out party.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Veli, you're the CEO of Lanturn. We'll talk a little bit about that. You've done a bunch of different things. I think what's interesting is you were a journalist, which before everything else, and then you moved into businesses, and then you started a business, and then now you're CEO of Lanturn. So we'll get into some of this. I think we'll just kick off the way we always do. Sure. You're definitely not from Singapore. How did you first get here and stay here?
Yes, I was living in Tokyo, but I was running a business in Hong Kong. And in 2011, I guess 2010, we decided it was time to relocate because the clients were all sort of migrating. They were leaving Tokyo and they were heading to Hong Kong, and some were coming to Singapore. And so, yeah, I was essentially just following my clients. And I looked at Hong Kong. I had 2 young kids at the time, and schools were too complicated in Hong Kong. It was a lot more straightforward here. I already had an office. The business I was running, Poseidon, had an office in Singapore already. And if I'd lived in Hong Kong, I would have been commuting to Singapore every month. And I just decided to sort of turn that around, live in Singapore, have the kids go to school here. And yeah, my wife likes Singapore a lot as well. So yeah, decided to live here and commute to Hong Kong. So did that from 2011 to 2016.
Got it. And now it's home.
And now it's home.
For the time being. Yeah.
For how long are you here?
Arrived June 2011. Didn't really live here as it's conventionally defined till 2016, 2017. Mm-hmm. I remember I sold Poseidon in 2016 and I started spending more time in Singapore and realized that I didn't know any restaurants and didn't know where to go for good coffee. And whereas in Hong Kong, that was all super straightforward because I was up there 2 weeks of the month, working out, meeting clients, finding new clients. And then when I was back in Singapore, it was hanging out at home, spending time with the kids, taking them to sport, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I really didn't know my way around Singapore at all. So I think, yeah, live probably since about 2017. And it's been a fun ride.
Still here. Yeah.
So let's touch some of your experiences. You run a few different companies, and some of them were during downturn when things didn't work well. Mm-hmm. Share with us a bit of how you steer the way of these companies during, downtimes.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've always been a big reader, and even before journalism, I worked in banking briefly. And before that, I was very briefly in publishing as well. And I think even though I've sort of bounced around industries, the thing that never really changed was the fact that I was just a heavy consumer of books. Lots of nonfiction and lots of fiction as well. And thinking about the nonfiction I went through, I read a lot of garbage, I've got to say. But along the way, you come across these gems written by people who nobody really thinks about anymore. But I kind of came across this book written by a British economist called John Kay, and he was a brilliant guy. He was best known for being a columnist at the Financial Times, but he also started and sold a very large equity research business called Lombard. Mm-hmm. He was a professor at Oxford. I think he was an advisor to the central bank, and he wrote this book called Obliquity, which isn't really a word, but it essentially pulled together a lot of his columns from the Financial Times, but looking at the world through the prism of how does a business get through difficult times. And, I think when I first read it, it wasn't really kind of relevant to me day to day. But when I ran my first business in Japan, when I was running this business in Hong Kong, which I was also the founder of, and over the last few years running Lanturn as well, the core lesson from that book has always stayed with me. And the core lesson is you just have to hustle through. Like actually muddle through was the word he uses. He's a Scot. And he talks about in hard times, you muddle through. Don't take any big bets. Don't open a new office. Don't launch a new product. Don't, batten down the hatches, trim your costs, do everything you can to maintain revenue growth. Do not throw a ton of money at marketing because you're pushing against the closed door when people have decided not to spend. And that was, in 2 words, that's basically always been my strategy. Muddle through.
Yeah.
Get through the crisis and figure things out on the other side. I mean, the interesting thing for small businesses today is it's almost a perpetual crisis, right? Because it's never been hard to run. It's never been easy to run small businesses. And it feels like in the last few years, it's become even harder. There's greater volatility. Volatility is not your friend if you're running a small business and you have a balance sheet that, doesn't have 8, 9, 12 digits on it in terms of cash balances. And so, it feels like, I think, not just at Lanturn. I mean, we kind of broke even 2 years ago now. So, and we were, we've been profitable and cash flow positive for a while. But even so, I wouldn't say it's an easy market right now. And I think it feels like we're perpetually kind of muddling through in some ways. So, and I think, everybody I speak to at other businesses as well, this year was harder than last year. Last year was harder than the year before, and on it goes. So it's a real challenge. It's never been easy.
And I think Singapore is not easy at the moment with what's happening with inflation, changes in employment, capital. I think outside of the crazy startup world, I think read the news, F&B is getting crushed. Small business appears to be getting crushed. So I think that's added on to the normal struggles of just being a small to medium-sized business, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think Singapore, as I think of it now, it's an amazing place to incubate a business. But the local market it's small. I mean, what's the population now? 5.5 million?
6.
6, right?
I think it clicked 6. Yeah.
Yeah, so 6 million. I mean, what's the population in New York? I don't know off the top of my head, but
10 or something.
20.
Yeah,
what's
20.
Greater New
20.
York is.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Japan, right? Greater Tokyo is 40 million people, right? So it's an amazing place to incubate a business, but if you want growth, you're not going to find it here. And if you look at what works in Singapore, it doesn't necessarily work in neighboring countries because they are at a different stage of development. So, I mean, thinking of a lot of the Singapore headquartered fintech companies trying to get traction in markets in Southeast Asia beyond Singapore, it's been a real struggle because it's a very fragmented region. And if I look at people that have done well, they've generally made the jump and at some point ended up in the US, which again, I don't know what the population in New York is, but the population in the US is what these days, 300 million?
3 something.
Yeah, kind of. I want to challenge a bit about managing during crisis and downturns. In tech industry, and I think it's depending the industry, but in tech industry, there are lots of good examples of how they took an advantage of crisis for growth. So I think it's not always, the right way, depending your business. Do you agree?
I agree completely because we benefited from that as well. So on the one hand, COVID was a terrible experience on many levels for the entire planet. But as a business, we benefited massively because we were cloud native, digital only, and suddenly companies that we were competing against that were very analog, very good, but analog, and therefore very hard, very kind of off limits to their clients, they were suddenly on the back foot, and we just saw like a rush of new clients. So I think crises can really help you if you have great products. And I think we again, we benefited significantly. But now that things are, I wouldn't say entirely. I mean, has the clock kind of turned back entirely? Pretty much. I mean, everybody's traveling as much as they were before COVID, and so
a lot of return to office mandates.
Pretty much, right? Yeah, people want to sit down and meet in person again and do all these things. And the airlines are, I mean, good luck getting a seat on a flight to a lot of destinations these days. And yeah, you see that advantage that we had during the crisis has kind of gone away. We're still growing and at a kind of healthy rate, but it's definitely tougher than it was during COVID.
Yeah, I think it's like a new phase that's post-COVID, a new normal, but yet add what you talked about, plus AI, plus Trump.
Changing the economics.
It's yeah. Nothing's kind of even keeled at the moment, right?
Yeah. Plus, I think the other thing as well is, I think in absolute terms, the number of new companies being set up in Singapore and everywhere else hasn't changed very much. But one of the things that has changed is that venture capital is far less active today than it was 4 years ago in terms of the number of companies they're seeding. And yeah, I mean, what does Lanturn do? Lanturn helps other people helps other companies focus on their core goals. And we pick up the middle office, back office, accounting, tax, immigration, administrative burden for them. And the reality is that, yeah, it's hard out there because VCs aren't writing checks, and not a lot of new companies are being. There's still a lot of companies being set up, but they're not getting traction.
Yeah, it's a different era on that, and it's globally too. I was listening to the Ride Home podcast, and even the seed to Series A numbers in US have dropped tremendously. There's still a lot of capital, but it's going. Yeah, bigger, higher up the stack.
Besides Israel.
Huh? Besides Israel. You guys are like
doing well.
In cyber.
We are a cyber nation.
In cyber. Yeah. It's another story.
Let's focus on the strengths.
That's fair.
Yeah.
We won't go through all your journalism history, but you've lived in a couple different areas, involved in journalism, bureau chief, actually writing the articles, investigative journalism, I think, as well. How has that background influenced how you run businesses? And even the business you got into was related to investigations a little bit, right?
Yeah, the first business I started, one of the first I started was focused on investigations. I think when you're in journalism, or when I was in journalism, I couldn't believe people were paying me to do what I was doing. I spent about a decade in journalism. I worked with some amazing people at some amazing publications, some of them still around, but all now like a shadow of their former selves. But I spent probably half the time in what was known as kind of the fireman role. So the fireman role was something blows up, you jump on a plane and you go to the site of the hijacking or the natural disaster or the military conflict or whatever it is. So I did that for quite a while. And there's a lot of people who do that for a lifetime. And after about 3 years of that, I thought, okay, that's enough. I've seen enough.
What was the period of time in your life? Like, what was the years? Do you remember?
That would have been like 95 to 97.
Okay.
I was like a fireman, just doing, it didn't happen every week, but sometimes you'd go to work in the morning and at lunchtime you'd come back from lunch and somebody would say, there's a car picking you up outside in an hour. And I hope you got your passport with you. And I never went anywhere without my passport. So
you had a beeper? You had a beeper that time?
Back then I had a beeper, but I also had one of these mobile phones that you could throw through a window. It was so large and heavy. Yeah. So I got one of the first Motorola's. Yeah. Not the car phone,
okay.
But the next one with like the big fat battery pack.
Yeah.
It was very...
In Israel, we used to call it banana.
The banana, okay, yeah. So I had one of those and I had... my passport with me in all times, and people would be like, okay, car's picking you up in an hour, you might want to go to the 7-Eleven across the street and, buy a toothbrush. And sometimes, one time I got flown to Okinawa, and then from Okinawa we flew out to the South China Sea and we landed on a US aircraft carrier. because the US Navy was conducting war games off the coast of Taiwan. So some things haven't really changed. Taiwan is still a sticking point.
Sounds like today.
It sounds very much like today. Yeah, but this would have been like 96. Yeah, so we landed on an aircraft carrier, and then we spent however long we spent, and then they flew us off. It was really, it was
just what, to show it's part of an agenda, right?
The agenda was to highlight to the Chinese government in Beijing that there was a US aircraft carrier in the Taiwan Straits, and that they were, they had F-15s launching and landing on the deck. Doing
cool.
It was very cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, we actually met the guy that the Tom Cruise character in Top Gun was modeled on. He was like some legendary US Navy pilot who'd done like 5,000 hours or something crazy in a fighter plane, and they were like, that's the Tom Cruise guy. So we got to do a lot of fun stuff like that as well. And you could never really, you thought there's no way. Like,
was there any shirtless volleyball on the decks or no?
No, there was none of that.
No, right.
No.
But I want to get to more. You did investigation. This was like the Fireman, let's say, stories. But you did investigation stories. I want to get to kind of a edgy story, maybe, that you can share.
Yeah, somehow I became fascinated with the Japanese underworld. So with the Yakuza.
Okay.
And I realized pretty quickly that the Yakuza was very tightly enmeshed with mainstream politics through far-right groups. So you had Yakuza-related far-right groups, and then these far-right groups were close to right-wing politicians. And you could go back to like the 1930s. This was kind of how it had always been, and nothing had really changed. And so I started... A Japanese journalist I knew introduced me to a guy that ran a fairly large right-wing organization, and he had friends in the Yakuza camp because he was kind of ex-Yakuza. He switched careers, and he was very tight with politicians as well. He told me, and one day we're out having. He'd take me to I remember when I first met him, we go out to lunch, and we go to some incredible sushi place. And then at the end of lunch, he'd just get up and go to walk out. And I'd be like, first few times, I'd be like, we have to settle the bill. And he was like,
paying?
No, crime don't pay. Crime don't pay. So we just got to walk up and like walk out, stand up and walk out of these places. And then eventually I got to know him well enough that one day I somewhat foolishly challenged something he said. So he's talking to me about this senior member of the Liberal Democratic Party, which has been the ruling party in Japanese politics for most of the post-war period. And I'd heard this a few times, and it was a hot summer day, and we'd had a couple of beers, and I think I was a little bit lightheaded, and I said, "No, come on, you're kidding me. You don't know any politicians." And suddenly he kind of freezes. He gets up and he walks out. And then for a few weeks, I started actually locking my door at home. So in Japan, I never locked the door, never locked the car. You just didn't need to. And I started thinking, what did I do? So I started locking the door. And then one day he calls me and he says, meet me outside the Diet building, which is the Japanese parliament. And across the street, they have office buildings for the politicians. So we meet, and he's like, meet me outside, office block number 1. There's 3 of them. So we meet outside number 1. We go in through the metal detectors, and we get taken upstairs. And we go upstairs and we go into a politician's office, and he's greeted, "Oh, Nawa-san, we haven't seen you in ages." Everybody in the office knew him. And so we get ushered into the politician's main office, and he's not there yet. So they bring us fruit and they bring us tea, and we sit and we wait for a while. Then he shows up, and I end up in this strange situation where I'm a journalist for what at the time the Herald Tribune, which was a really fun paper to work for. It was basically an American paper run out of Paris. And I'm sat in a room with a fairly prominent underworld figure and a very prominent Japanese politician. And this guy seems completely, the politician not long after I met him, he was using this underworld figure to do Oppo research for him. So Nawa-san, the underworld figure who's passed away now, he handed in this envelope of dirt on another politician. So he'd gone and done Oppo research on one of his rivals in the LDP, hands him the envelope. And then the guy the politician specialized in agriculture policy. So he's like, oh, you're a journalist. If you ever need any insight into Japanese policy around agriculture, just, you know where to get me, right? Like
I was trying to understand the motivation, want to bring you to that room to see that. Like, what was
He's
their
proving his point.
He was proving his point. Yeah. I had challenged him and he was like, no, I'm going to show you. And I was sitting there thinking,
at least it was a non, getting hurt way of being proven the point, right?
Yeah.
Did you have your tape recording stuff?
No. But this guy, not long after I met him, became the agriculture minister. Right? And not long after that, he committed suicide in a hotel room. Hung himself from the belt from the bathrobe.
Oh.
Because, the way politics works in Japan, roughly, I don't know, like 25, at least back then, this is like in the 90s. I don't know how much it's changed, but back then, 20 to 30% of mainstream politicians at the national level when they were starting out, they didn't have money. And so they would take help from whoever was offering it. And all the organized crime groups would always be there to help. And once they helped you, very hard to walk away from them. So 20 to 30% back then had some degree of relationship.
It's almost like an investment, right? They're getting stake to become a politician, but you know where the money's coming from.
Your VCs.
No, my favorite.
It was an angel round.
It's an angel round.
He's doing his first run for parliament. I'm going to invest in his angel round.
Great cup table, no?
Tokyo Vice and Jake Adelstein. It's one of the first books I had read.
Yeah.
In the scene.
Yeah.
And actually, when we were both on Twitter, I used to DM us if he'd write me back and stuff. And this stuff fascinates me. Even to this day, it's not that much different, right?
How different is it in other countries?
Yeah, I guess it's just Yakuza's dwindling, though. That's a fair thing. But I think their tentacles and all this stuff is everywhere, right?
Yeah.
He has a new book out. It's really good.
Okay, I read it.
Yeah, it's great. Trying to figure out where we go. How do we take it from here to the next thing? In the whole world of due diligence, which is what Poseidon was and stuff like that. And I'm sure your investigative journalism coupled with business kind of morphs into that thing.
Yeah.
What did that look like, and how did that kick off?
Yeah. So I was working at Time Magazine. I was kind of like the interim bureau chief in Tokyo. And it was kind of, on paper, it looked like the dream job. But it was just as kind of legacy media was starting to fall apart. And after about 6 months, I thought, this just makes no sense. This is all, the wheels are coming off the bus here.
For media in general.
For legacy media in general. Yeah. I'd been at Newsweek earlier. The Herald Tribune, I think, was about to be taken over by the New York Times.
That's one of the papers I used to read in Hong Kong, right? It was one of the international. It was a great paper.
Great paper. Yeah. I loved the
white with the black print and the big logo on the top, right?
Yeah.
It was one of my daily reads in Hong Kong. Right?
Yeah, it had one of the world's great music critics, Mike Sferrin.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Who, when I joined the Herald Tribune, the editor said, "Okay, you're coming to Paris for 2 weeks to meet everyone. Who do you want to meet?" I said, "I need to meet Mike Sferrin." And he was one of the first. I had lunch with Sferrin. Never took his sunglasses off or his hat. He was always super edgy guy.
Music critic.
Yeah. He was amazing. Yeah. He actually, I'm going to get the year wrong, but he sat in with Miles Davis in 1951 or something. He played trombone. He was
nuts.
Yeah, he was a really amazing guy.
Yeah. So back to, how did this turn into a business?
Oh yeah. So I decided to get out of journalism. Because I was married at this point. My wife was she was a journalist as well. And she was actually a way, way better reporter than I ever was. She was at the Washington Post. I was at Time. Washington Post is still doing fine. Time, wheels are coming off the bus. And then I started kind of looking around, and I went pretty deep into the idea of doing a PhD focusing on looking at Japanese organized crime and politics in Japan through the prism of sociology or political science and got very close to almost being like a pointy-headed academic.
I can't envision that.
No,
Sorry.
I don't think it would have lasted very long. and then as I literally had I'd been offered a slot at a great university in the US, and they'd said, free ride, just really want you. This is a fascinating subject. Come do this. And as I was mulling it over, I had a friend at one of the US investment banks who came to me and he said, we're really struggling with due diligence. And how about we make you our sole provider? And we want you to build a company to service us. And the only thing you can't do is you can't work for Goldman Sachs.
Competitor.
Because they're our biggest competitor. You can work for anybody else, but you can't work for Goldman. So I was like, I have friends at Goldman as well. And I was like, yeah, it's okay. All right. So I started off doing that, thinking, I don't know where this is going to go. But that basically became my first business in Japan. So we were doing kind of deep research in Japan, lots of stuff that journalists didn't do. So we'd go pull all the public records. We'd be very systematic around doing media searches, and then we'd just supplement that with lots of interviewing. I mean, it's not unlike what you would do at a strategic consulting firm or one of the big four ahead of an M&A deal or a restructuring or a turnaround. But yeah, that was basically it. It was basically deep dive research. And
they wanted it to make financial decisions of things to buy, things to short, things to...
So they were mainly, I worked for different parts of the bank, and they were at the time buying lots of distressed real estate. Mm-hmm. And distressed real estate in Japan usually translated into there's Yakuza involved. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of overtones of what happened in Japan kind of back in the late 90s, early noughties with kind of what's happening in the kind of early stage space. So the Japanese banks had given huge amounts of money to developers and corporates, and everybody had stopped paying the interest and not everybody, lots of companies had stopped paying the interest and the principal on the loans. And the banks were like, okay, we'll give you a bit more money to help you get off your knees, and then you can start repaying principal and the interest. And a lot of companies never got there. And when the banks went to kind of foreclose on the loans, it typically involved seizing real estate. Mm-hmm. Real estate was always the collateral in Japan. So the underlying real estate was being taken by the banks and it was being sold. Mm-hmm. It was being auctioned. People realized very quickly that if you moved a Yakuza group in as a tenant into your commercial real estate property, the banks were less inclined to show up. And actually, when people were kind of perfecting that strategy, there was a couple of bankers killed. There were people who had their houses firebombed.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. And once there was one guy in Nagoya who he was basically assassinated on his doorstep one morning. And he was known for being particularly aggressive around foreclosing on loans and seizing real estate from Yakuza-linked borrowers. And once that happened, everybody was like, I didn't get into banking to get shot in the face.
You can keep your property.
I'm just going to roll this loan over. So that went on for years. And then at some point, Japanese banks started selling portfolios of bad debts. And the buyers were mainly US and European banks. Mm-hmm. And they realized pretty quickly that Yakuza would happily shoot a guy at a Japanese bank, but it would be a diplomatic incident if they shot somebody at Morgan Stanley or Goldman. And so Morgan Stanley, Goldman, Lehman Brothers, which was still around at the time, and then a bunch of funds, Cargill, Carlyle, some of the PE guys, Lone Star, they were all Deutsche, all went in and bought a lot of these bad debts, and with the view to foreclosing on the loan and seizing the real estate and selling it. So at some point, I think Goldman was the biggest, owned 100 golf courses in Japan. because they'd gone bankrupt and they'd seized the courses, and they had, I forget the name of the company, but they had a company that held all of the golf courses. They owned like 100 golf courses. Another one of the banks owned like 100 love hotels. Other banks specialized in something else, office real estate, B class office real estate or whatever it was. One of the banks I did a lot of work with, they focused mainly on distressed hotels. So they owned a lot of hotels. So a lot of people made a lot of money doing that. And they were able to do so because even though many of them were Japanese, they were not working at Japanese banks. And so they had cover from US government, European government.
I think one of your, I'm trying to call it unfair advantages, that you were speaking Japanese. No?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Yeah. I studied Japanese. I started studying it at the age of 18. I did it for a couple of years. I went and lived in Japan for 6 months. Then I dropped out of the Japanese program I was doing, did an economics degree, but in the middle took a year out and then went and lived in Tokyo. And I don't know, languages don't come especially easily to me, but I don't struggle necessarily. And it was a lot of hard work, but yeah, I got to the point where, I mean, even today, even though I haven't lived there in a long time, I visit for quite a while every year, and yeah, I can still get around.
Does it come back quick, or it's like a couple of days of jump starting it?
It comes back really quickly, and I think and it's partly because I had amazing tutors at college, and we used to sit in rooms not unlike this, where you would, they were called language laboratories. So they'd play you a sentence and you'd have to repeat the sentence. And then you'd listen to the recording of you reading the sentence, and they just make you do that like 100 times. And
critiquing it. And
after a while, you kind of want to be like, I'm not really enjoying this anymore. Yeah. But it helps you really kind of nail the pronunciation and also the grammar as well. So yeah, it comes back. It kind of surprises me that it's still coming back, especially as I'm getting a bit older. But
yeah, I had some of that in the Thai classes and some of the final ones where they had newspapers and it's brutal. I did not do well at that stuff. It was So I think you're a good one to ask this. Obviously, the podcast is the Generalists, and so sometimes we get in these diatribes of specialism over journalism. Yeah. You've had quite a different career arc. And we've talked about this before. What's your view on this, and how is this factored into what you do and how you look at things?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can. Am I a generalist? I guess I am, but I think also at different times in life I've kind of picked up new skills. So about 10 years ago, after I sold my last business, mainly because I was fascinated and partly by accident, I spent a couple of years focusing on technology products, how you package them and how you price them. And there's an amazing book. I forget the name of the authors because one's Indian, the other's German, and I always forget their names. But the book is called Monetizing Innovation. And it was kind of a landmark book in the product world. Mm-hmm. I mean, you listen to podcasts around product and packaging and pricing, and people are still referencing that book. And I think it came out in 2017, 2018. But I did a couple of courses and I did like a bunch of things, and I really kind of dug into product. And as you know, I kind of am very involved in product at Lanturn and really enjoy it. But I think I guess at heart, I'm still like more of a generalist. And I don't know, it's a tough one, right? I think if I look at sort of how we're building products, we have around the team product, engineering, operations, commercial, right? And those stakeholders between them have every skill set known to man, right? And the generalist, like what how much do you need to know about each of those in order to be able to help them to work together? And that's kind of what I think that's why I got into product, because I think a lot of product, I mean, we can talk about my failures as well. So I co-founded a company in 2007 in Tokyo with a guy who's now, I'm not sure where he is. I think he's in Costa Rica now. But we were both in Tokyo, and we built a customized web crawler to help brands find counterfeit goods sold online. So the emergence of e-commerce had a number of unintended consequences, and one of them was the sale of counterfeit goods went from being something that took place in wet markets to something that happened online.
Yeah, overnight practically.
Literally overnight,
yeah.
Right? And as a counterfeiter, you went from holding inventory to building to order. And we built a web crawler to find counterfeit goods for sale, initially on Taobao. Right? And our first client was large German sportswear company, and they were like, go find... Yeah, I'm pretty sure that, it was Adidas, right? So Adidas was our first client, and they were like, go find...
It's a good client.
It was a great client.
For first?
Yeah, it was a great first client. Yeah, and Adidas was our first client, and for years, we basically helped them figure out... We basically, run reports showing them how many Adidas counterfeits were for sale on Taobao. And then beyond that, we would basically go in and say, and these 500 sellers are the same people, because they are using exact same photos, like the metadata is the same, it's the same phone number, it's the same email address. It's
but finding them and getting anything done about it's a totally different thing, right? Like you could point them to it, but what do they got to do? They got to go to Taobao and get them off the marketplace, but they pop up in it. It's like whack-a-mole, isn't it? Or
well, so what they would do is, because it would be like 3 guys controlling 500 sellers, they would... And everybody had limited budgets. And for Adidas, less of an issue, right? It's a counterfeit shoe. What's the worst that can happen? You sprain your ankle a bit more easily because it's not the real thing. I don't know. But it was a big issue with car parts. It was a big issue with pharmaceuticals. It was a big issue with baby formula. It was a big issue with kids' toothpaste. I mean, everything was being counterfeited.
I would more call it intelligence capabilities. Feeds to the market.
So what would happen with the data that we generated was, so we'd basically map out, we'd kind of give Adidas a map and say, these are the 3 big clusters. And at the start of every year, they would say, okay, we're gonna go after these 3 clusters. And that would then involve working with law firms that gave them access to the government in Beijing. And they would then go after the people who were running these syndicates. And I don't think they made a huge amount of... I mean, Adidas, I don't know. I can't say for sure, but I remember going to a conference in San Francisco one year, and it was 300 of the world's top fashion and sports brands. Fun conference.
So what was the failure over there? You said, I want to share a failure.
So the failure was we didn't raise money quickly enough. So we found out when we got to this conference in San Francisco, we discovered that there were 4 other companies doing the exact same thing as us.
Classic?
Absolutely classic.
You know about that?
We've all been there,
Just
right?
been there.
Yeah.
In 2025.
Yeah. Okay. We can talk about that in a second.
Okay.
I should be interviewing you guys at some point. But
Can.
So we get to the conference. There's 4 other companies doing the same thing. One of them, MarkMonitor, went out and raised... like within 6 months of the conference, had raised like 30 million US in 2007.
It's a big number.
Big number.
For 2007.
Yeah, they raised 36 off the top of my head, like a proper amount of money. And then just swept. I mean, we all just got wiped out.
Yeah.
So we had some great clients. It was one of these strange technology companies where...
Why? Because you didn't have a moat? Why?
There was probably only... So for companies like Boeing, that stuff you do in-house.
Yeah.
It's mission critical, right? You can't have people counterfeiting airplane spare parts. For the pharmaceutical companies, you do it in-house. People die. So actually the market wasn't that big. It was companies where it was like, it was fashion labels and sportswear brands. So there isn't that, it's not actually such a big market. And they raised a lot of money, put a lot of money into marketing, put a lot of money into sales, put a lot of money into product development. And they just had, a much nicer interface. I don't think their product did anything that ours didn't, but that's an old story, right? And they crushed it on the commercial side. And then I think a couple of years later, they were sold for like 200 million or something.
Yeah, I remember when MarkMonitor was sold to one of the other big.
I think Thomson Reuters bought
manages data and brands and stuff.
Yeah. And then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was sold again as a bundle of stuff that Thomson Reuters decided was non-core.
Yeah. It's a good point because we're talking about the startup space.
Yeah.
And what do you think that startups' mistakes are doing in other, like, which different from corporates?
Yeah.
We have a different struggles over there. You just mentioned like marketing, but do you see any other things that startups?
For me, the main one. So at some point, I was a mentor to a lot of startup founders. I was like a venture partner at like a fund. And the thing I saw from my conversations was, and sometimes this can be right, but generally people would go with like a gut feeling. Like it's my gut feeling that in this sector of the fintech world, the market needs X.
I feel it.
Yeah, I feel it. And I know this because I worked in that little niche of the fintech world. And my problem with that was always, and this actually brings us back to monetizing innovation and how you design products, was people would not, they would trust their gut instinct and they wouldn't go out and do enough research to verify that actually they were right or how right they were. And I think this is how bad products get built. People don't do, I mean, Michael knows.
Yeah, this is actually, I've learned this from you. And it's, when you think of the lean startup, and you've done this with your Miro boards, and then you go and you guys should talk about this more because you're doing kind of what he does, which is this, I'm building nothing until I've talked to X amount of people. I've talked to them about the features. I've talked to them about the price. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? That's your process. He's got a huge Miro board for this stuff. I've been able to see this firsthand being around you with Lanturn, where it's like, we are not writing code literally until the buttons have been on the screen and measured.
For me, it's a waste of money and time. I don't know how you see it.
I think you set yourself up to fail. Like I say this, people think I'm being rude, but like I said this in front of like one of our colleagues. I say this in front of engineers all the time, but I say to people, if you're asking engineers to use their imagination during product build, something's wrong, right? And I say this in front of engineers, and they, like the smart ones, and we work with a lot of smart ones, they sit and they say, yeah, I don't want to have to use my imagination. I want to
know exactly what we're doing.
You need to know exactly what you want, and you need to communicate it to me in a way that I can understand, right? And I think this is where I think huge amounts of capital are wasted, right? People do not know what they're building and why. And a lot of it is, I went and spoke to these 10 guys and they said they'd love to have this. Okay, yeah, of course. If it's free for them, they're not spending a penny of their money. And again, back to monetizing innovation, feature preference analysis. Here's 7 features. Pick the one you love the most and the one you hate, the one you would never want. And go and do this for every feature you plan to build, and build a league table to see which is the feature people want. Then next step, go figure out what people will pay for these features. Because if they just want it, but I'll give you $1 a week, why am I building it?
Yeah.
Right. So this is, and then you go do your market sizing exercise. And I remember meeting one guy who was telling me about, we're addressing $1 trillion opportunity.
Trillion.
Yeah, trillion. And I thought, that's pretty good. I think you're like 500 billion above anybody else I've spoken to. And he was like, yeah, we're gonna rock the
Did you have your checkbook out?
Yeah, I was ready to write in the angel round check. Yeah. So he's like, it's $1 trillion market. It's like, okay, that's addressable. What is attainable? Like, what can you attain? Can you get $2 million?
As Craig says, like the Tam something like, no, what's actually possible?
Yeah. What's total attainable market for you in the next 3 years before you run out of money? Right. And so yeah, I think there's a lack of, I refurbished a house in Greece a few years ago, and I was kind of surprised by how similar that process was to actually building like a good technology product. And I kind of approached it in the same way, in the sense that, like, I worked with Greek contractors who are, that's as fun as it sounds, by the way. And I don't know why I kind of did it this way, but before we even started, I had like a 50-page book drafted by an interior designer. And it was like, okay, in this book, there are 4 pages for the electrician. There is 4 pages for the plumber. There is 4 pages for the guy that's doing the windows, whatever it is. And you'd start the day and you'd be like, okay, what are we doing today? We're doing this. And at the end of the day, you'd be like, doesn't correspond with what we discussed in the morning. Yeah, no, that's not what you said.
This picture on sheet 2.
Yeah,
that's not what I...
You said do something else. I said, what do we say at the beginning of this process? If it ain't in the book, it ain't getting done. Right? The book can be wrong. We can go back and fix it later, but we're not diverging from the plan. Yeah. Initially, we can go back and tweak it later based on feedback and from users, right? But yeah, I think refurbishing a house and building a product, to me, very, very similar. It's just a very, I guess at the end of the day, it's not even product, it's project. It's a project management exercise. Pull together stakeholders, figure out what your resources are. Yeah, I spent way more time working on the plan for this refurbishment than it actually took to do. And it took 3 months. But I spent probably 6 months
prepping.
Yeah. So
what do you think makes a product person good versus less?
I think, so if you look at the product world, product managers tend to be either former engineers or former salespeople. That seems to be where a lot of them come from in the US. Right? If you do like these product courses or whatever. And I think the thing that, irrespective of the background, I think the key ingredient is curiosity. Right? You need to be constantly asking, do we really need this feature, or what is this feature for? What pain point is this feature solving? Why are we solving it in this way?
Which, correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to be the guy interrupting. Yeah. I've always suspected this had something to do with doing so much journalism, because it's always pulling that thread of like, I got to figure this out. I got to have the data to show this. I got to interview this guy. I've always felt that that's actually why you're this way with product, even if it wasn't intended.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I mean, I think the thing you learn in journalism is to gather large amounts of data and synthesize them very quickly. And in journalism, it's not life or death if the synthesis is wrong. Right? You can come up with the wrong story based on your data. Doesn't matter. You just go on to the next story. I mean, it can matter.
No, it might come back on liability, who you are, your name.
Yeah. I mean, within certain boundaries, right? You don't need to be like 100% accurate all the time, and I question whether many journalists are. But as long as you're kind of, the trick in journalism is I collect a huge amount of data and I boil it down to 800 words or 2,000 words or whatever your story length is. And I think that's, for me, it's a similar thing with product as well. And again, I mean, back to monetizing innovation. There's a fabulous case study in that book where they look at the Porsche Cayenne, the Porsche SUV. And I guess the two authors are at Thomas Kuscher Partners, I'm going to say. It's a large German consulting firm that's known for product and pricing and packaging. And the two authors are, I think from memory, were both partners at the consulting firm. So I assume they did the product strategy for Porsche when they released the SUV. And that car for a long time, and maybe even to this day, was the most profitable vehicle like ever mass produced. Like the margins on this were crazy because they got the packaging and the pricing so right. So when they released it, it has 4 tiers. It's got the Turbo S, the Turbo, the Cayenne S, and then the Cayenne. And they started with the Turbo S, which for some reason costs, I don't know, 4 times the cost of the Cayenne, even though it's like 5% different kind of thing, or 10% different.
Status.
And once they had, and there was queues to get this, and once they'd sold 5,000 or whatever and kind of demand was dropping off, then they brought out the Turbo at like 50,000 less. Same thing again, like people queuing around the block. It's like an iPhone release like 10 years ago. People queuing around the block, sleeping on pavements to get hold of their new Cayenne Turbo. Once that had died down, then they did the S, then they did the entry-level model. And the way they were so successful is they went out and they just gathered a huge amount of data, and then they obviously very successfully pulled the right conclusions from the data they gathered.
It was the first luxury
SUV
performance guy to do SUV as well, right? And yeah, there's a lot written about how crazy it was and what people were essentially overpaying for, right? It cracks me up. We got to move to our closers.
Yeah.
I have one quick one that I want to add to and it's in the same vein. I think I know myself, I struggle with confrontation in startups when you're running them and firing people. And I know this is a sucky subject because there's people getting laid off. And so I'm not taking it from that angle, but I'm taking it from the angle like people need to learn to do this. And I think something I've learned from you is just the being quick to, and I almost bring this back to journalism again, being quick to say, I'm assessing all this data. I'm taking the personal stuff out of it. You're not the right person for us. We're cutting bait. We're moving on. And you've done this in like a few days. And I'm sure you've done this in your other businesses, right?
Yeah.
Is that a fair kind of assessment of it? And like, or maybe I'm making it too simple, but I think this is something that it's hard to do, right? And it's hard sometimes to be clinical about it, if that's the term. But I also know it's also emotional because these are people that you're.
From my point of view, the key metrics for success.
Being able to do this?
Yes.
Yes. But it's tough. It's not easy.
Life is tough.
Yeah.
Michael.
But what's your like view of this? Or did I make it too simplistic?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, yeah, so over the years, I did a lot of work for Goldman Sachs, and of the banks I worked for, and I probably worked for more than 10, less than 20 large US and European banks, and Japanese and Singaporean and some mainland Chinese banks as well. Of the ones I worked for a lot, they had probably, I mean, there were great people at all of these organizations, but they ran the tightest ship. And if you spoke to people there about what set them apart, and they were by no means the largest, they're nowhere close to being anywhere near as big as JP Morgan or even Morgan Stanley or Citi. They don't have a retail arm. Actually, they do in the US, but they're not that big, right? But it was supremely well run. And one of the things they all pointed to was the fact that, I think it varies slightly from year to year, but generally, even in a record year, they would cut 10% of headcount. Because you would go into the year and you'd say, these are your metrics. These are the KPIs you need to hit. These are our expectations for you in the role in which you're in. And then they would just stack rank like every year.
Yeah.
And the benefit of doing that is that you end up by cutting the 10% worst performers in your organization every year, you just raise your averages. And you don't end up in a situation where you're losing good people because they're surrounded by people who shouldn't be at your organization. Right? I mean, it's the old cliche, people don't quit their jobs, people quit their boss. Right? So if you are the boss and you don't have the courage to build a high performing team, you're going to lose your top people because high performers want to be around high performers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, I've seen this at many early stage companies as well, but I've also seen it at larger companies.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's endemic to a startup per se.
No.
Yeah.
But I think startups maybe struggle with it because it feels
I think it costs you more as a startup
to not be doing it.
Yeah, because you have limited resources. If you're a major global brand and there are a gazillion of them out there,
you can have a little fat on the body.
You can let that thing ride for the momentum is so strong that you can just turn the other way and kind of let the let the dead wood accumulate.
Yeah.
Right. But like, jokes aside, I kind of feel as though if you're the bottom performer in an organization, you can't be happy. Right? Because either consciously or subconsciously, you're on the wrong career path. You're in the wrong organization. You're not performing. Nobody's really happy with you. You're not really a team player because other people are having to do your job for you or parts of it. And my view is always that, I mean, we're very lucky in Singapore, and it was the same in Hong Kong and in Japan as well. I've let people go over the years on performance grounds and sometimes for other reasons, when you're in a downturn and you just got to tighten your belt. But I don't think anybody that's been in that situation with me has not walked out and got another job very quickly if they wanted one. Like, I look at Singapore now, I mean, you can have 5 jobs in a week. I mean, the labor market is so tight for people with skills. I mean, maybe that's exaggerating it, but it's not a difficult place to find another job, right? And I don't think that, nobody's going to end up living under a bridge. So and I think it's better that people have, in some ways, like the opportunity to go find a job that is a better fit for them, where they can make a contribution, where they are going to be a top 10 performer. I think that's better all around.
Better for everybody.
Yeah.
But it's a process.
Agree.
All right. Thank you for that. I know it's a tough subject.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay.
All right.
Closures.
Yes.
What are you going to tell your 20 years old when you know right now?
So I have a 20-year-old son, and I'll tell you what I told him.
But this is a different story.
Not really, no. So I've said this to both of my kids, and I kind of said it to myself, and it was kind of said to me as well. So I was basically told, in your 20s, don't worry about anything. Just go out and just follow your nose and do whatever you can, and figure out what it is you don't want to do, right? And that's a very good start. And I realized early on I didn't want to work in asset management or banking. I realized I really enjoyed being in journalism. And I think as I was approaching 30, I also started to feel as though journalism is fun, but I'd rather be the guy doing the stuff rather than writing about the guy doing the stuff. And I think that's kind of what led me to what I've done like since my early 30s. So for over 20 years now, I've been some crazy entrepreneur, founding companies, running companies,
Yeah, and eliminating is helpful to getting to where you want to be.
Yeah.
That's an important fact.
Yeah. And I come from my family, my father was an entrepreneur, my grandfathers were both entrepreneurs. I mean, it's sort of in the DNA, and it just kind of felt very natural once I got into it. The journalism was fun. I loved it. I was reasonably good at it. I had amazing times working for amazing publications with some incredible people. I felt a little bit out of my depth. I remember going to New York to sit in the Newsweek office for 2 weeks in the late 90s and thinking, what am I doing here? Everybody around me was like, wow. But yeah, I learned a huge amount. It was a ton of fun. And yeah, at the end of the day, the great skill and you didn't realize it at the time, but the ability to take large amounts of data and synthesize them quickly is the great gift that journalism gave me.
Yeah. And I can attest to what he's told his son, because I've watched his son racing a Formula car in England. So
yeah, dropping
process of elimination is he's not going to school and he's racing cars, and I'm jealous. What do you do to stay fit and on top of your busy schedules?
Yeah, so I have always loved to exercise. I used to compete. I don't compete. I compete with myself these days, but I basically do ton of stretching, trail running, walking, cycling, gravel biking, lifting, plyo. May try Pilates next, and then every winter I try and get like a good number of days in the mountains doing backcountry skiing. So yeah, I've always been kind of very active, and 6 or 7 days a week I'm usually working out.
Yep.
You didn't stop drinking alcohol entirely, but really cut back about.
Yeah, it put a strain in our relationship.
Yeah, it really strained our relationship.
Like, hey, we're gonna go get a beer. Like, I'm not drinking. What? Like,
I do a beer with you.
Yeah.
No, I've really cut back, and now probably have a drink like once a month, and that's kind of been good as well.
Yeah,
good.
I applaud it.
It's good.
Yeah.
You said you're reading lots of books, and you already mentioned, so we have.
I got a lot of show notes.
The show notes, but give us like a recent book that you like, or even a TV show. I don't know if you watch TV, but
TV show Slow Horses.
Oh, it's great.
Slow Horses.
Apple TV.
Apple TV?
Yeah, it's
I
great.
don't have Apple TV.
Oh.
It's really amazing. So I read the books.
Yeah.
I read the Mick Herron. There's 8 of them. I read them
modern day spy stuff in England. It's
set in London.
Yeah.
Really amazing. Yeah. I read them literally back to back a couple of years ago. And then somebody told me, oh, you realize that's now a TV show. So went on to Plex. It was there. I've shared Plex with like friends. And watch those shows. Gary Oldman is amazing. Yeah. So is Kristen Scott Thomas.
Yeah. It's a great show.
And a book. Give me a book.
I've read some interesting books. So I've been big on rereading the last few years. So I'm going back and reading novels. Nonfiction, not so much, but novels that I read in my like 20s and 30s, even in my teens. So I recently read Middlesex by Jeffrey Evianidis, as it's pronounced in Greek, but I think Eugenides as it's pronounced in the US, which won a ton of prizes like nearly 25 years ago. And it's basically two novels in one. And it's the story of a brother and sister escaping from Turkey and relocating to Detroit in the 1920s.
Wow.
So that's book 1. And then book 2 is about one of their grandchildren growing up in the US as a hermaphrodite. So it's considered one of the great works of fiction about hermaphrodites. But it's amazing. It's basically a book about growing up different. Oh, that's the second part of the book. But yeah, so I reread that for the first time in over 20 years. That's a eye-opening book. And then
I got a lot of research to do for show notes.
Yeah.
Thankful for.
Am I the first one to use the word hermaphrodite on
the podcast? I believe so.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. The last one we shipped was the first one to have expletives, but that's okay. We're good with it. Well, we got to wrap. This is fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this. Thanks for digging deep, and we appreciate it. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, sir.